All right, today we're going to unpack one of the most explosive and important turning points in all of human history, the French Revolution. And believe me, this isn't just some dusty old story. It's the moment that really planted the seeds for our modern world, for ideas like democracy and human rights. But it's also a story about how deep inequality can push people to do the unthinkable.
I mean, just think about it for a second. What does it actually take to push an entire society to its breaking point? What makes millions of people decide to completely tear down a system, a monarchy, that's been in charge for centuries? That's the huge question at the very heart of this story. So let's get into it.
So, our story kicks off in the late 18th century. And on the surface, France looks like a superpower. But underneath, well, the whole kingdom was basically rotting from the inside out. You can think of it like a giant pressure cooker, just sitting on the stove with the heat turned all the way up.
So what exactly was in this pressure cooker? Well, just look at this. French society was insanely unbalanced. It was split into three groups they called estates. You had the clergy, the first estate, and the nobility, the second estate. Together, they made up a teeny tiny 2% of the population. And then there was everybody else. The farmers, the shopkeepers, the lawyers, all crammed into the third estate, a whopping 98% of the people.
And this really shows you that it was like two different countries living side by side. On one hand, you had that privileged 2%. They were rich, owned most of the land, and get this, paid almost no taxes. On the other side, you had the 98%, and they were carrying the entire financial burden of the country. They had zero power, and a lot of them were literally starving. It was a system just begging to implode.
And it wasn't just the inequality. France was completely broke from fighting all these expensive wars. Bad weather led to bad harvests, so the price of bread, the main thing people ate, shot through the roof. The king, Louis XVI, he wasn't exactly a strong leader. And to top it all off, you had these powerful new ideas from the Enlightenment spreading like wildfire. Ideas about liberty and rights, and that government should actually serve the people. It was truly a perfect storm.
With all that pressure building and building, you just knew something had to give. And it did. The people, who had been kept quiet for centuries, finally started to find their voice.
Okay, so the king's bankrupt, and he calls a big meeting of all three estates. But here's the thing. The system was totally rigged. Each estate got one vote. That meant the clergy and the nobles, the 2%, could always outvote the 98%. Well, the third estate had finally had enough. They made a demand that was absolutely radical for the time. Voting should be done by head. One person, one vote. This wasn't just some small tweak. It was a full-on challenge to the entire old way of doing things.
And after that, things started moving fast. As you can see here, when the king basically ignored them, the third estate took an incredibly bold step. In June, they just went ahead and declared themselves the National Assembly, the true representatives of the French people. And just a few days after that, they really upped the ante.
So, they show up to their meeting hall one day and find out the king has locked them out. But did they just go home? No way! They walked over to a nearby indoor tennis court and they all took a solemn oath. They swore that they would not give up until they had written a brand new constitution for France. This was the point of no return. This wasn't a protest anymore, this was a revolution.
But words and oaths are one thing. The pure anger that was boiling on the streets of Paris was about to erupt into an act of violence so shocking, it would become the symbol for the entire revolution.
July 14th, 1789, a date that would absolutely echo through history.
An angry mob in Paris, hearing rumors that the king was about to send in the army, stormed a medieval fortress called the Bastille. Now, it was a prison, sure, but it was so much more than that. It was a terrifying symbol of the king's absolute and oppressive power. And when that fortress fell, it was this massive symbolic victory. The news just exploded across the country, sparking revolts everywhere. The revolution was now completely unstoppable.
So, with the old world shattered, the revolutionaries had an even bigger challenge on their hands. How do you build a new France from scratch based on totally new ideas?
Well, these were their guiding stars. Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Liberty, equality, fraternity. This powerful motto became the soul of their brand new world-changing document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen.
And this declaration, it just completely flipped French society on its head. It said, from now on, all citizens are equal in the eyes of the law. It guaranteed basic rights like freedom of speech. And and maybe the biggest move of all, it just wiped out all the special privileges that the nobles and clergy had enjoyed for centuries. Just gone.
But the shockwaves from these ideas didn't just stop at France's borders. Nope, they traveled across the entire world. And honestly, we're still feeling the tremors today. The French Revolution basically gave the world a whole new blueprint for how a country could work. It lit a fire under democratic movements all across Europe. It fueled revolutions for independence way over in Latin America. It spread this idea of nationalism, that you're a citizen of a nation, not just a subject of a king. And it pushed this radical idea that what you accomplish should matter more than who your parents were.
But it is so important to remember that this story has a very dark side. The revolution spiraled into this incredibly violent and paranoid phase that we now call the Reign of Terror. Thousands of people, including the king and queen, were executed by the guillotine, all accused of being enemies of the revolution. It's a really powerful warning about how revolutionary ideals can get twisted and the terrifying danger of extremism.
And that kind of brings us back to the main point. The French Revolution proved, really for the first time in modern history, that ordinary people had the power to completely remake their world. So it leaves us with one last thought. When you look around at our world today, at our ideas about rights, democracy, and equality, what echoes of 1789 do you still see? Because they are all around us.